You know, with blueprints and Satisfactory, we can construct functional, realistic, good-looking and even easy to handle rail infrastructure. So today, I want to show something about a dozen different blueprints for railway track creation. There will be viaducts, trestles, elevated trucks, double-deck bridge structures and even anti-gravity levitating support platforms. So we will go all the way from the ancient history through the modern times and up into a science fiction territory. I will show how to make those in-game, with all the small tips and tricks, and as usual, I will share my blueprints for free, because, well, I'm a gamer, not a YouTuber, God forbid. Most of those structures would be grounded in real-life rail construction techniques, and I will explain a bit of those, well, while creating my blueprints on camera. Quite a bit of research went into this video, and now my hard drive is full of, well, railroad pictures. So, give this video all the engagement and allow it to perform better than ordinary gaming videos. And if you want to support me, well, there is always this super sticker thing on the YouTube. So, let's go! Placing rail on the ground is usually not a pleasant solution in Satisfactory. Satisfactory map have a bunch of sharp elevation changes, and by elevation track we can avoid majority of those, and let alone we can actually pass other traffic beneath our rail system. Before the update 7, creating detailed elevated track en masse was not really an option. Well, if you are kinda a sane person. RCI can always stand in your way, and well, let's be real, placing thousands of supports by hand is not something that many people can enjoy. And well, here's an example of typical elevated track before the blueprints. Just making 1 meter concrete foundation path and placing concrete support column every 10 foundations, and after that just deleting the excess. Boring, dull, and in my later save I was just using an upgraded version of those, with the small pillars being encased in the steel structure. Made it with the blueprints, and then I was like covering the half of the dune desert, and I was thinking like, wait a second. I'm just placing a blueprint, why not to make it way more detailed? And this is how the first viaduct have been created. Railroad viaducts in real life have been around for quite some time. They are absolutely an engineered solution, and this is why earlier railroads used them quite a lot. Arch is very strong load-bearing geometric shape, and it will not fall apart from constant dynamic stress. Thousands of years ago, ancient Romans used aqueducts to deliver water into their cities. And a lot of those structures are still standing today. The longest ancient Roman aqueduct system was in the modern-day Istanbul and was even longer than 400 kilometers, which is well 250 miles. Modern term for viaduct is derived from Latin for road, which is via, and ductus, which is led or guided in English. And aqueduct is aqua, water, well in English, and once again ductus, guided or led. And now I'm talking too many languages. In Satisfactory Blueprint 4x4 you can cram 3 support columns, but I have decided to go with only 2 to give it a slimmer look. This means that there should be like 2 meter gap between half arch pieces in the middle of the blueprint and 1 meter gap on the either sides. I am using half foundation pieces overlapping into each other as the support column, and on the sides I add small concrete pillar to add this minor detail and to break up the plain sides of the viaduct, because well, if you are placing like 10 of those or maybe even like 20, it will look really dull if you have like flush face. Also, I'm using 32 meters of height on every single railroad blueprint, and the reason for this is well, extra materials is just automation time of your factory, while extending the pillars by hand is your personal time, so it's better to waste materials than to waste your personal time. And for the bidirectional railway, I'm using 8 meter wide deck, which is well 2 foundation wide. This is not so important for the viaducts, but well, if we'll make something like more than the viaducts itself, it will become more obvious, especially with like pillar supports, and I just want to have some level of standardization in my railroad system. With viaduct section ready, good question is how to use it, and this is really important because this will apply for every single blueprint. Just slapping it on the ground can work, but we can do better. There are several tools we are required to use. First, we place a foundation in the air at the desired height. Then select your viaduct blueprint. Next, aim for the bottom of foundation with the blueprint itself. Once you eyeball it into a roughly acceptable place, you can press H key. This is the nudge tool, and now your build piece is locked in place.
Note, this is Update 8 experimental feature. It's not yet available on the Update 7 early access.
And with the first section in place, we can totally just go for the blueprint placement mode with the R key and snap every sequential blueprint to the previous section. Unfortunately, you cannot connect rail track by snapping blueprints itself, so this is why railroad will be constructed manually after viaduct construction. Eventually you will run out of space or height, and even 32 meters of elevation is not enough, and we will need to make a slope. And viaduct shape is surprisingly allowed to make a realistic looking slope. Here's how you make it. On the design front, we will need to adjust height of every sequential arch piece by 1 meter. And to make those small concrete pillars on the sides, well, we can just use the foundation on the top and bring the pillar down. This way we will have it flush with the slope. There will be unfortunately a little bit of clipping on the deck over here, but once rail is in place, it's not really noticeable. So now we have this bizarre angle blueprint. How we make it into an actual slope through several blueprints. Note that this angle blueprint is still counted the same height as the horizontal section, so if you will use the blueprint snap mode, well, it will snap in this bizarre shape. After the first section, we need to lower it down. To achieve this precision, I just extend the level of the deck with foundation pieces. Then I aim sloped section from beneath into the rough spot. And then I use the H key notch tool to bring the section into a perfect alignment. And later I just deconstruct extra foundations. And in this simple manner we can have continuous slopes for our viaduct and still retain all the level of detail. Definitely better than making it by hand. And now let's move into a more modern territory with railroad trestles. Railroad trestles were a common thing during earlier railroad construction. Predominantly it was made from wood to chop down even more wood. And wood allowed for increased flexibility to deal with the dynamic stress, but at the same time it was kinda not a longevity solution, because, well, rotten fire can deconstruct a lot of wooden things. And well, they are up there in the nature with no proper maintenance, so yeah, usually more permanent wooden trestles were either filled up with embankments or replaced by steel or concrete. And to this day, you can find derivatives of trestle construction in modern-day railroads, highways, and even roller coaster construction. In Satisfactory, obvious pick would be small concrete pillars at an angle. I went with 5 per section, and to make it even more of a trestle design, I decided to make total of 2 support groups per blueprint. With more modern rail supports, I will use only 1 support point per blueprint. So this will make trestles to stand out as something more, well, I guess, primitive. Tricky point is how to make an angled beam. And first you need to make a deck and then bring down the painted beam at desired angle. Then you construct small overlapping section of beam into the backwards direction, and after this you just delete the original beam and snap concrete pillar to a stub. Now you can bring your pillar all the way up at an angle. Repeat this 4 times and you have yourself a concrete trestle. Here are some shots of this beauty in the game. And here is an example of another modern looking trestle. Nothing really fancy when it comes to construction, just bunch of steel beams cross-braced 2 times into a trapezoid box with a height of 30 meters. Nice alternative if you want to use steel over concrete. This particular trestle is not so easy to extend, but if you have a small gap before ground, you just can slap a big concrete pillar and imitate awesome looking foundation. Also, you can see that I'm using inverted small pillar supports as some sort of the base for my deck. Good question is, what is this? Well, this is how we are entering into a modern territory of construction. Obvious issue with viaducts and trestles would be how they deal with dynamic stress. Wood is great material and can bend a lot, but something like concrete or steel can only bend so much. The lack of any sort of spring can take its toll on any construction and lead to a catastrophic failure at some point, especially if we deal with heavy-duty rail traffic. So, structural bearing pads is the common feature that you can find in any modern bridge and elevated structures of any sort. Usually it is something elastic and we need to simulate this in Satisfactory. Obviously, concrete piece is not what we want to use, and the pillar support piece pretty much is perfect visual option when painting black. Also for this blueprint, for the column here, I'm using 4 rounded concrete pieces, looks quite sturdy and you can even extend it with an extra blueprint when necessary. Extra bonus to 8-meter wide deck is the ability to carry numerous belts and pipes beneath the deck, and I just placed 3 steel beams for an extra extra detail. Another thing that I commonly do with my rail support is to carry numerous power chains, but honestly I do not place the outlets itself on every single blueprint anymore, since it's just not so cost effective. The interesting part is how to make slopes from those pillar supports. To place blueprints higher or lower, similar to the Viaducts, I use 4-meter foundation pieces and bring them up or down every section. Then I place blueprint from beneath and rely on simple nudge tool for a minimal adjustment. You can notice that I'm using half foundations for all of my rail decks. Works nicely horizontally, but vertically we still lack the slope half foundation piece in Satisfactory. I just prefer to deconstruct deck and then replace it with angled support ramps and call it a day. And as another interesting iteration, we can use pipes as the columns. Just place 1-meter foundation in the base and make perimeter from the pipe floor holes. Then bring columns up and finish decorating with 1-meter round pieces. Columns can be painted into any color, and well, the central bit can be something like a big metal pillar to have some contrast. So now, let's go with something more monumental. Having only 1 or 2 options for majority of your train network is boring. We need variety. And here, we are using 2 load-bearing pieces with fat oval-shaped column. In the middle, we have space for the hyperloops, pipes and belts. And to have this gap, one can use concrete pillars constructed from the low elevation to match the desired height. Once again I rely on the nudge tool to bring pillars into the alignment, and this fat column design is definitely looking like something that you place into the water with the rough currents, whatever. But what if you want to carry all the pipes in the belt under the railroad deck? Here's an option with steel grinder to funnel through numerous connections. I do not feel that this needs detailed explanation. This is just a bunch of steel pieces under the deck and 2 columns and the deck divided for trains and trucks. I prefer to funnel trains on the one side, since well, in this manner it's way easier to handle connecting to other rail infrastructure. Also, you can always just place 4 or even 5 tracks onto this railway support, and I do not make railings on top as part of the blueprint to have the flush connection with other 32-meter blueprints. And the final variety would be concrete pillar A-frame. It is basically using the same technique for angled pillars as previously showcased Trestles, so nothing new for the construction techniques. And for the grinder I'm just using inverted slope concrete pieces, and if you want to make supports for the belt, you can always align them with a nudge tool. Alright, now we are entering into double-decker territory. 32 meters of height in the blueprint is enough to have 2 levels of trains or to slap a highway on the top. There are quite a lot of double-deck elevated rail track in the real life, but for Satisfactory blueprints I just started with iteration of, well, my previous blueprints. So I lower down the second deck 12 meters down and widen it up 2 meters to account for the central supports of various shapes. Another option is to have triple solution with rail/highway on top and another rail going through down beneath. Also for the double deck there is another interesting solution and option working quite well with the limitation of blueprints, and I am talking about K-Truss bridge structure. This structure, where 2 decks and truss structure itself forms a nice sturdy box. K-Truss is one of the older options in the bridge construction, and it was quite popular in the real life since it was way easier to assemble. Obviously it resembles the Latin letter K, and this looks like something more monumental than ordinary supports that I done before, so I want to reserve this structure for closing the canyons and working as an actual bridge. For this, we will require a second blueprint extending our support pillars downward. And to reduce weight, once again we are using arches. Previously with fat column design it was reasonable to place them into a water. Why? Well, because they have no gaps and water like gaps. Here we can totally get away with gaps to reduce the weight, since there is no water stream to destroy and mill down our supports. So here we go. This is our double-decker variety. We have A-frame, pillar supports, huge estacades and even K-Truss bridge. But there is another interesting bit. What to do when you have a standalone rail. At some point, you will have quite the span of rail in the air. Maybe it would be on the turn, or in the place where you have multiple train stations, or maybe you have just random rail in the middle of nowhere. So we can totally snap pillars to the bottom of the rail. But what about blueprints? Well, it doesn't work. It doesn't work like foundations, and we need a better solution. So actually it is quite easy. You just place concrete or metal pillars as usual, then you create 8-meter height blueprint with a load bearing. You use the foundation to get exact height of your pillar in your blueprint, then you just delete 2 pillars from the support and you replace it with the blueprint itself. Nice, clean, easy and looks realistic. Now, let's go in the opposite direction from the realistic. You know, science fiction usually have some sort of magical anti-gravity engine. This allows for Deep Space Nine to have artificial gravity, while way more superior Babylon 5 need to spin around like a fidget spinner in 2017. And now, this video dislike button is burning hotter than Rocinante escaping from Donager. When it comes to the magical science fiction, I was always baffled by sheer lack of anti-gravity in city architecture and designs. Coruscant from the Star Wars looks like a modern-day Dubai and not like a proper megalopolis of galaxy-spanning civilization. Where are all the billboards taken up half of the sky? Where are all the fancy villas floating in the clouds? Or maybe levitating planters for the three-dimensional parks? Or inverted architecture? You know, there are a lot of possibilities. So, let's change that by making a levitating rail support in Satisfactory. We start with a simple deck, then we place beams, paint them red so they go faster, even though they are not going anywhere, but whatever. Slap some pipe floor holes to imitate the shape of an engine, then encase everything into a steel pillars, add smaller LCD screens beneath, crank up the strength of the light emission to 500, slap some pillars, slap some pillar supports and call it a day. What a script, dude. And here you go, you have the legit excuse to have floating foundations in Satisfactory. If you never exported blueprints, you will need to do this manually. You need to go to your system disk, users, your username, app data, local, factory game, saved, save games, blueprints. There your game session would create a folder once you have blueprints unlocked in your progression and have created first blueprint. Every blueprint consists from 2 parts, .sbp file with parts and items and .sbp cfg file with text description and color settings. Quick note that my blueprints are done in update 8 experimental and they will crash on all the version of Satisfactory. Links to blueprints are in the pinned comment down below. Thank you very much for watching. Give this video magical gravity thumbs up. And until the next time, have a nice one, and Yakis out!